Somewhere in the far north of Australia, beneath layers of red sandstone older than any written human story, there is a chamber, a small, quiet, sealed chamber. It sits below ground in a region most people will never visit, in country that the people who do know it call by names you may never have heard. And according to the small group of scientists who have studied it from the outside, without ever cutting through the stone that seals it, this chamber has not been opened for at least 1,000 years. Think about that slowly for just a moment. 1,000 years, when this chamber was last sealed, the Norman conquest of England had only recently happened. The first European universities were just being founded. The great cathedrals of medieval Europe were still being imagined. And in northern Australia, somewhere out beyond the modern roads and the tourist routes and the satellite photographs, someone or some group of people did something deliberate enough and careful enough that it has remained untouched ever since. We do not know what is inside. That is the first thing to understand. We do not know what is inside, and there is a very good chance that we may never know, because the people whose ancestors lived in this country are, quite reasonably, not in any hurry to let strangers come and pry open a 1,000-year-old door for the sake of curiosity. The chamber is on what is called country, in the deep meaning of that word, and it belongs to those traditional owners, not to museums or universities or governments. But we do know some things. We know roughly where it is. We know roughly when it was sealed. We know from ground penetrating radar and other gentle, non-invasive technologies that something is in there. And we know from the rock art around the area, from the stories that have been carefully shared, and from the comparative study of other known but unentered sites across the top end of Australia, that whatever is in that chamber was important enough, sacred enough, or precious enough that someone made very sure it would last. Tonight, we are going to walk slowly through everything that is known about this chamber, and the country it lies beneath, and the long, quiet, patient history of one of the oldest continuously inhabited landscapes on Earth. We will move gently. There is no need to hurry. The chamber has waited 1,000 years already. It can wait a little longer. Before we go any further into the quiet of this story, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so that the next long, slow journey into history will find you when you need it most. And if you like, leave a comment somewhere down below. Let me know where you are listening from tonight. It helps the channel grow and it helps me find more stories worth telling. Now then, let us begin. 1. The shape of the country. To understand the chamber, you have to understand the country it lies beneath. And to understand the country, you have to forget, for a little while, almost everything you think you know about distance. The top end of Australia is not like other places. It is a vast, slow, ancient landscape, and it does not announce itself with mountains or with sweeping rivers visible from a long way off. It announces itself instead with patience. The land waits for you. You can drive through it for hours and feel as if you have hardly moved. You can fly over it for an entire morning and look down at country that has not changed in any visible way since the first long shadows of the dawn. The region we are concerned with stretches across the very top of the Australian continent, from the western shore of the Kimberley, through the broad flat salt pans of the central north, into the great escarpment country of Arnhem Land in the east. It is country made of sandstone older than memory, of paperbark forests that smell sweet in the cooler months, of rivers that swell into wide brown floods during the wet season, and shrink to a thin trickle in the long dry. It is country of crocodiles in the tidal estuaries, of agile wallabies on the rock ledges, of small fires lit on purpose by people who have been managing this land with fire for tens of thousands of years. And it is country with secrets folded into it. Not secrets in any dramatic sense, but quieter ones. Caves that no living person has entered. Painted rock shelters that have not been visited for generations because the path to them has been forgotten, or because the people who knew the path have chosen not to share it. Rock holes filled with still, clear water that hold the memory of every footstep that ever passed by. And somewhere in all of this, the chamber, sealed, quiet, waiting. We do not have an exact location, and even if we did, it would not be the right thing to share. The traditional owners of the country in question have asked, very reasonably, that the precise coordinates remain private. So when we speak about where the chamber is, we will speak in soft terms. Somewhere in the long stretch of stone country between the upper reaches of one of the great northern rivers and the edge of a high sandstone plateau. Somewhere within a day's careful walk of an old painted shelter that has been mapped, but only generally, by archaeologists. Somewhere out beyond the dust and the heat and the long horizon, where the country dips into a small, almost invisible fold, and where a slab of weathered stone leans against the side of a low rise as if it has always belonged there. That is where the chamber is. And now you know as much as most people in the world know about its location, which is to say, almost nothing. And that, in a quiet way, is part of the story too. 2. Deep time and what it really means. To stand on the rock country of northern Australia is to stand on stone so old that the human imagination struggles to hold it. The sandstone of the great northern escarpments was laid down by ancient rivers and shallow seas more than 1.5 billion years ago. That is not a typing error. 1,500 million years, or thereabouts. The grains of quartz that you can see when the light hits a fresh broken edge of the stone were already old when the first multicellular animals appeared in the sea. They were already old when the dinosaurs walked, and they were still old when the dinosaurs disappeared, and they remained old very quietly, while every other epoch of life on Earth came and went above them. The rock has been pushed up, worn down, weathered, cracked, rained on, fired, and rained on again so many times that the surface you see today is not really the surface that was first formed. It is the long, slow result of all those forces acting together. The cliffs you can see in photographs of Arnhem Land or the Kimberley are not the original sediment. They are what remains after the water and the wind and the heat have removed everything that was softer or more soluble or less patient. They are the leftover bones of a continent. This matters for our story because the chamber, the sealed one, is carved or shaped into rock that is itself part of this same patient stone. When the people who sealed the chamber 1,000 years ago did their work, they were working with material that had already been waiting for them for 1.5 billion years. The stone did not care. It does not care now. It will not care when another 1,000 years have passed, or another 10,000, or another 100,000. And there is something deeply restful in that thought, if you let yourself sit with it for a moment. Whatever happens in the world above, the stone goes on being stone. Whatever the chamber holds, it sits inside a kind of geological permanence that human history cannot really touch. Deep time is the phrase that geologists use for this. It is a phrase that sounds simple but means something almost too large to feel. The chamber is 1,000 years old. The land it sits in is 1.5 billion years old. The chamber, in the long view of the stone, is brand new. The chamber is barely arrived. The chamber is, in a sense, the most recent thing to have happened in that small fold of country, and the stone around it is still getting used to the fact that something has been placed inside it. When you fall asleep tonight, somewhere out in that quiet country, the stone is doing what it has always done: holding still, holding patient, holding the chamber, holding everything inside it, and being entirely unbothered by the passing of any human year, or any human century, or any human millennium at all. 3. The first people and how long they have been there. The other thing you have to understand before we go any further is that the people who lived in northern Australia 1,000 years ago were not new to the country. They were not recent arrivals. They were not in any meaningful sense settlers. They were, and they remain, the descendants of an unbroken human presence on that continent that stretches back, according to the best current archaeological evidence, at least 65,000 years. And some researchers, working with very careful dating of stone tools and ochre fragments from sites in northern Australia, have suggested figures that may go even further. 65,000 years. Try to feel that number for a moment, the way you tried to feel 1,000 years a little while ago. 65,000 years is so long that the entire written history of every other civilization on Earth fits inside the smallest fraction of it. The Egyptian pyramids are not even 5,000 years old. The cave paintings of Lascaux in France are around 17,000 years old. The earliest known agricultural villages are around 12,000 years old, and the people of northern Australia were already living in northern Australia long before any of those things were built or painted or planted. When the chamber was sealed 1,000 years ago, the people who sealed it were already heirs to roughly 64,000 years of continuous local knowledge. 64,000 years of watching the seasons turn, learning the country, mapping the songlines, refining the fire management, perfecting the stone tools, developing the visual languages of the rock art, telling and retelling the stories that explained everything from the shape of a particular ridge to the proper way to catch a particular kind of fish. The sealing of the chamber was not, for them, the act of some young or experimental culture. It was the considered act of one of the most experienced and patient human societies that has ever existed. That is something worth pausing on. Whatever is in the chamber, whatever it means, whatever it represents, it was put there by people who already knew in their bones and in their ceremonies and in their long inherited memory how to make decisions that would last. They were not guessing, they were not improvising, they were doing something that in the long traditions of their people made sense, and they were doing it in a way that they expected to hold. It is held. 1,000 years on, the slab of stone that seals the entrance has not moved. The rock above has not collapsed. The painted markings nearby, where they exist, have faded only a little. The country has gone on. The seasons have gone on. And the chamber, whatever it holds, has gone on being a chamber, closed, sealed, undisturbed. Exactly as those very experienced, very patient people clearly intended. 4. The slab and the way it sits. If you were ever to walk up to the chamber, which you almost certainly will not, you would not necessarily see anything dramatic at first. The country there is not the sort of country that hands you its secrets quickly. The sealed entrance is set into the lower face of a small rise, partly hidden by a fold of weathered stone, partly shaded by a thin scrub of small hardy trees that grow out of the cracks in the rock around it. A casual walker, even a fairly observant one, could pass within a few meters of the chamber and not notice it. What you would see if someone pointed it out to you is a slab, a single large, fairly flat piece of stone, perhaps a little taller than a person and roughly as wide as a doorway. It leans against the face of the rise at a slight angle, and its lower edge sits a little embedded in the soil, as if it has settled there over time. Around the edges, where the slab meets the surrounding rock, there is a careful packing of smaller stones, and what appears to be a hardened material that researchers have, with permission, tested gently, and found to be a kind of natural cement made from local materials. Crushed termite mound mixed with ash, mixed with a binder of plant resin, in a recipe that the traditional owners say has been used in many ways for many things across many generations. The slab itself is not from the rise it leans against, it was brought there. We know this because the rock of the slab is a slightly different color and a slightly different grain from the rock of the surrounding outcrop. It came from somewhere else in the wider country, perhaps several kilometers away, and it was carried by people to this place. That on its own is not unusual. People in northern Australia have moved heavy stone for ceremonial and practical purposes for tens of thousands of years. But the fact that this particular slab was moved here, to this particular spot, and that it has stayed leaning in this particular position for 1,000 years, tells us that the act of placing it was not casual. Someone meant for it to be here. If you ran your hand across the surface of the slab very gently, the way the researchers have done with permission, you would feel that the surface is mostly smooth from long weathering, but with some small areas that are slightly different. Some areas where the stone has been worked, perhaps pecked with another stone, in patterns that are hard to see in daylight, but become a little clearer in the long low light of late afternoon. The patterns are not random. They form shapes that can be matched more or less to motifs found in the rock art of the wider region. Spirals, concentric circles, long parallel lines, a few small hand-like shapes near one corner. Nothing flashy, nothing decorative for its own sake. Just enough to mark the slab as belonging to a particular tradition, in a particular place, at a particular time. And then, around the base of the slab, where it meets the dust of the country, there is the quiet, the deep, undisturbed quiet of a place where, for 1,000 years, almost nothing has happened. A few small lizards have run across the slab in the heat of the day. A few small fires have flickered in the country nearby during deliberate burns. A few storms have come through with great noise and then left again. But no one has moved the slab. No one has even tried. 5. How we know it has been 1,000 years. The number 1,000 is, of course, not exact. It is the working estimate that researchers have arrived at by combining several different lines of evidence. And like all such estimates, it carries a certain range of uncertainty. The actual figure could be a little more or a little less. 900 years, 1,100 years, possibly even closer to 1,200 years, depending on which evidence you weight most heavily. But for the purposes of our story tonight, 1,000 years is a perfectly fair way to think about it. The first line of evidence comes from the cement around the edges of the slab. As I mentioned a moment ago, this cement is a natural mixture, and one of its components is plant resin. Plant resins, when they are part of a mixture like this, gradually lose certain volatile compounds over time at a rate that can be measured. With careful sampling, researchers were able to take very small amounts of the cement from the outer edges, where damage would be minimal, and measure these compounds. The measurements suggested that the cement had been mixed and applied somewhere around a millennium ago, not earlier, not noticeably later. The second line of evidence comes from the weathering of the slab itself. Sandstone, when it is exposed to the open air of northern Australia, weathers in particular ways. It develops a slow patina, sometimes a slight crust of microorganisms, sometimes a faint pitting where wind-carried grit erodes the surface. The rate at which all of this happens has been studied on other slabs and other rock faces in the same region, slabs that can be more or less precisely dated by other means. By comparing the weathering of our chamber slab to the weathering of those other dated surfaces, researchers were able to estimate very roughly how long it had been standing in its current position. The answer, again, was somewhere in the range of 1,000 years. The third line of evidence comes from the rock art in the nearby shelters. Some of the motifs on the slab match a particular style of rock art that has been documented across the wider region, and that style has been dated by other archaeological work to a fairly specific window of centuries. When the people who made the slab marks were working, they were working in a tradition that was active during that window. Outside of that window, the tradition is either not yet present or no longer dominant. The window, as it happens, includes the period around 1,000 years ago, and the fourth line of evidence, which is not strictly scientific in the way the others are, but which carries great weight in its own way, comes from the oral histories of the traditional owners of the country. Those histories speak of an event at a certain distance in the past when something was placed in the rock and sealed away. The number of generations back, when counted out in the way these things are sometimes counted, lines up roughly with the period the science suggests. Not exactly, but roughly. And in a story like this one, roughly is more than enough. So we say 1,000 years. It is a round number. It is a comforting number. It is a number that lets us understand the scale of what has happened and the scale of what has not happened without getting lost in decimals. 1,000 years ago, the chamber was sealed, and every year since then, the slab has leaned, and the cement has held, and the country has gone on around it, and no one, not one single human being, has opened that small, quiet space. 6. The sounds that the country has made over 1,000 years. If you wanted to feel what 1,000 years of waiting really means, you could try this. You could try imagining all the sounds that the country has made in that time around the chamber, while the chamber itself made none. There has been the sound of wind. Wind coming up from the south during the dry season. Wind coming in from the north and the northwest during the wet. Wind moving across the open plains and then through the broken rock and the small scrub of the rise where the chamber sits. The sound of wind in those small thin trees, a soft hush, sometimes a gentle whistle when the wind blows through a narrow crack in the stone above. There has been the sound of rain, not the gentle rain of a temperate country, but the great, drumming, full-bodied rain of the tropical north. The rain that arrives at the start of the wet and falls in sheets so heavy that you can hardly see across a clearing. Rain on the slab, rain on the surrounding stones. Rain pooling briefly in the low places and then running off into the wider country. 1,000 wet seasons of rain. There has been the sound of fire, small fires carefully managed, lit by the traditional owners at the proper times of year, for the proper reasons. Fire crackling slowly through the dry grass. Fire popping as it passed through the dry stems of the small shrubs. The soft sound of leaves curling, the sound of birds rising up from in front of the flames and then settling again behind them. Fires that respected the slab, that knew not to come too close, that were tended by people who knew the country. There has been the sound of thunder, of course, in the great storms of the build-up before the wet, the deep, rolling, immense thunder that can shake the ground, and that in the country up there can sound as if the sky itself is breathing. Thunder rolling over the rise where the chamber is. Thunder fading away again into the distance. The slab, of course, never moves. There has been the sound of animals, wallabies coming through in small mobs at dusk, their feet making soft taps on the stone. Goannas scratching their claws against the rock as they climbed the rise to sun themselves. Birds calling, all kinds of birds, kookaburras laughing at dawn, parrots screaming through the trees, smaller birds singing quietly in the heat of the afternoon, frogs calling from any nearby water hole during the wet. A dingo, perhaps, padding past in the night with the soft, almost silent step that dingoes have. There has been the sound of human voices, people walking through the country on their way somewhere else, talking quietly as they passed. People sitting under the shade of a tree nearby, having a meal, telling a story. People stopping at the chamber in the proper way to acknowledge it without disturbing it. Children laughing further off. The hum of conversation in language, in many languages, because this country has many languages, and the languages have been spoken here continuously in one form or another, for as long as anyone can imagine. And there has been silence. Long stretches of silence, nights when nothing moved and nothing called, when even the wind had died down, when the stars were so close that you might have thought you could touch them, when the slab leaned against the rise and the cement held its edges and the chamber inside was, as always, undisturbed. All of those sounds, all of that silence, all of that life passing around the chamber. And inside the chamber, whatever is inside, going on, being whatever it is, not noticing any of it. Or perhaps in some way we do not understand, noticing all of it. 7. The rock art of the region. Around the chamber, sometimes within walking distance, sometimes a little further, there are rock shelters. Northern Australia is famous for them. The escarpment country in particular is full of small overhangs and shallow caves where, over many thousands of years, people have painted on the walls. Some of the art is so old that it can only be dated indirectly by the geology of the rock surface itself. Some of it is much more recent, perhaps only a few generations old. And in between, there are layers and layers of painting, sometimes painted directly over earlier work, sometimes carefully placed alongside it. The rock art of the broader region around our chamber is some of the most varied and richest in the world. There are paintings of animals in great detail and accuracy that show creatures still living in the country today, as well as creatures that have long since vanished. There are paintings of people, sometimes in the middle of activities like hunting or fishing or dancing or fighting. There are paintings of spirits, of beings from the deep stories of the dreaming, of figures with particular features that mark them out as belonging to one tradition or another. And there are paintings of more abstract things, lines and dots and patterns that carry meanings that are sometimes shared with outsiders and sometimes not. Two famous styles of this art are sometimes spoken about by outsiders. One is the Wandjina figures of the Kimberley region in the far west, large beings painted in white with great dark eyes and surrounded by halos, who are associated in the stories of the local people with the bringing of rain and with the founding of the country itself. The other is the Gwion figures, sometimes also of the Kimberley, painted in fine red and orange lines, showing tall, slender human figures with elaborate ornaments and long hair in poses that suggest dancing or ceremony. There are many other traditions in Arnhem Land and across the rest of the top end, including the famous X-ray art that shows the bones and organs of fish and animals as if seen from inside. The shelters near our chamber contain art that draws on several of these traditions. There are no Wandjina there because we are not in Wandjina country, but there are figures painted in red ochre in fine lines in styles that researchers have identified as belonging to a regional tradition that flourished in the period around when the chamber was sealed. There are also some older paintings underneath, much fainter, in styles that are thousands of years older than the chamber. And on top of those, in places, there are more recent paintings of figures and patterns that locals can sometimes identify with specific people, ancestors, and events from within memory. What the art tells us when it is read with care and with the guidance of the people whose tradition it belongs to is that this country was and is important, that ceremonies were held here, that people gathered here for particular purposes, that this was not just country to pass through, but country to come to, country to be in, country to make decisions in, and that the chamber, sealed into the side of its small rise, sits at the center of a wider landscape of meaning that has been built up and added to and renewed across many, many human generations. You will not see most of this art in photographs. You will not see it on a tourist trail. Some of it is in places that visitors are welcomed, and the welcome is real and generous when it is offered. But much of it is in places that are quietly held by their people, and that is exactly as it should be. The art exists for the country and for the people of the country, and only secondarily, when invited, for anyone else. 8. What the songlines say. Across the great inland of Australia and in the country we are concerned with tonight, there is a way of knowing the land that scholars have come to call songlines, although the various peoples of the continent have their own words for it, and the concept does not translate cleanly into any single English term. A songline is, very roughly, a path through the country that is also a song, and a song that is also a story, and a story that is also a map, and a map that is also a kind of law. The path winds across the land, sometimes for hundreds or thousands of kilometers, and at each point along the path, there is something to be remembered, something to be sung, something that ties that point into the larger pattern. Songlines were how, and in many places still are how, people kept track of country across distances that, by any other method, would have been impossible to manage. A person traveling along a songline can know by the song where there is water, where there are particular plants, where there are dangers, where there are places to camp, where there are places to pass through quickly, where there are places to stop and conduct ceremony. The song is the country, and the country is the song. Walking the path is singing the song is walking the path. There is no separation. Our sealed chamber and the country it lies in sits on or near at least one songline. The exact details of which songline and what is sung at that point along the path are not for me to share, even if I knew them in detail, which I do not. But what is generally understood and has been shared is that the chamber is part of a larger pattern of meaning. The chamber is not a single isolated thing, it is a node. It is one point along a line, and the line connects it to other places, sometimes very distant places, sometimes places where similar sealed things may exist, sometimes places where the same story is told in a slightly different way. This is important because it tells us that whoever sealed the chamber 1,000 years ago was not improvising. They were not doing something new or strange. They were doing something that fit into a much older, much wider, much more carefully thought through pattern. They knew where they were on the song, they knew what came before on the line and what came after. They knew what role this particular act played in the larger arrangement. When we say that the chamber has been undisturbed for 1,000 years, what we mean in part is that the songline has been respected for 1,000 years. The people who knew the song have, in each generation, passed on enough of the song to the next generation that when the time came to walk past this point, they knew not to disturb it. The chamber has not been undisturbed by accident. It has been undisturbed by knowledge, by careful, patient, deliberately maintained knowledge that has been carried in human voices from one person to another across 40 or 50 or 60 generations. That, in its own way, is just as remarkable as the sealing of the chamber itself. 9. The seasons of the country. Most of the world thinks of a year as having 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. But the people of Northern Australia, the people who have lived in this country for tens of thousands of years, do not count their year in 4s. They count it in 6, or in some places 7 distinct seasons, each one named, each one with its own particular weather, and plants and animals and proper activities. To live in the top end is to live by these seasons, and to know them is to know the country. The seasons are not the same everywhere across the north. They differ a little from one country to the next, with different names in different languages, and different markers in different places. But the general pattern is shared. There is a hot, wet time when the great rains come and the rivers run high and the country greens and the storms roll across the sky. There is a cooler, drier time when the air becomes still and the grass turns brown and the country opens up and walking is easy. And there are several in-between seasons, transitional times, when one weather is becoming another and when the country itself seems to be changing its mind. In the country around our chamber, the wet season begins, depending on the year, sometime late in the calendar year that outsiders use, and runs on into the early months of the next. The rains fall hard, the country fills with water, the water holes that were dry come back to life, the fish move up the swollen rivers, the crocodiles, which never really go anywhere, become more visible because the water is everywhere they might be. The chamber, in its small rise, has water running past it on all sides. The slab does not move. The cement holds. Then the wet eases off, and the country enters the long build down towards the dry. The rivers drop. The water holes shrink. The grass cures into a tall, pale gold, and the country begins to look, to outside eyes, almost dry, although the people who know it can tell you that there is still water there for anyone who knows where to look. This is the time for traveling, for visiting, for ceremony, for the long, slow social work of holding the country together. People may pass near the chamber. They do not disturb it. They go on their way. In the depths of the dry, the country is at its most open. The sky's clear day after day. The nights are cool, sometimes very cool by the standards of the tropics. The stars are bright. The fires are lit in their proper places by the people who know how, and the country is gently burned in patches to keep it healthy, to keep the big destructive fires from ever building up. The slab in front of the chamber stands in the cool air. The cement around the edges contracts ever so slightly with the cool, then expands again as the warmth returns, but it does not crack. It does not give way. It holds. And then the build-up begins. The hottest, most still time of the year. The time when the air feels heavy, when the clouds begin to gather in the afternoons, when the first soft rumblings of thunder can be heard far off, when the country waits. The waiting is its own kind of season. The waiting can go on for weeks. And then, one day, the first true rain falls, the wet returns, the cycle begins again. 1,000 years of these cycles, 1,000 wet seasons, 1,000 dry seasons, 1,000 build-ups, 1,000 build-downs, 1,000 intervals in between. The chamber has been through them all. The chamber has been completely indifferent to all of them. The chamber simply is. 10. The Macassan visitors and what they brought. About the same time that the chamber was sealed, give or take a few centuries, something interesting was happening on the long northern coast of Australia. Visitors were arriving. They came in boats from the islands to the north, from what is now part of Indonesia, and they came to fish, particularly to harvest the small sea creatures known as trepang, which were valued as a trade item across much of East Asia. The people who came were known in the language of the day as Macassans, after the port of Makassar in the southern part of Sulawesi, from which most of them sailed. They were not invaders, they were not conquerors. They were seasonal visitors who came each year with the favorable winds, set up camp on certain beaches, gathered trepang in the shallow waters, processed it on shore by smoking and drying, and then sailed home again with their catch when the winds turned. This relationship between the Macassan visitors and the people of the northern Australian coast went on for several centuries. It was, by the standards of how outsiders often arrive in other lands, a fairly gentle relationship. There was trade, there was sometimes intermarriage, there were words exchanged between languages, and some of those words remained in the languages of the coastal people long after the Macassan visits had ceased. There was the introduction of certain goods, such as cloth and metal tools and tobacco, and certain practices, such as the use of a particular kind of small dugout canoe. And there was, importantly, no permanent settlement. When each season ended, the Macassans left, and the country returned to its own people. The exact dating of when the Macassan voyages began is debated. Some researchers place the beginning of regular contact in the 17th or 18th century. Others have argued, based on certain pieces of evidence, that the contacts may have begun earlier, perhaps even in the period around when our chamber was sealed. The truth is probably somewhere in between, with occasional earlier contacts gradually becoming more regular over time. What does this have to do with our chamber? Possibly nothing direct. The chamber lies inland, away from the coast, and there is no reason to think that any Macassan ever saw it or knew of it. But the broader context matters. 1,000 years ago, the people of northern Australia were not isolated from the wider world. They were part of, in their own way, a much larger network of trade and exchange and occasional visitation. Things from elsewhere reached them. Things from them reached elsewhere. The country was not closed. This might suggest, although we cannot know for sure, that whatever was placed in the chamber was placed there at a time when the people who placed it had a wider sense of the world than we sometimes give credit for. They were not naive, they were not parochial. They knew in some general way that there were other peoples beyond their own country, other ways of living, other things that could be brought from far away. And in that wider context, they made a particular decision in their own country, on their own terms, to seal something into a small chamber and to leave it there. Whether they knew about the Macassan specifically, we cannot say, but they knew about the world, and they chose, knowing the world, to do this very particular thing. 11. The technology of sealing then and now. When we think about how the chamber was sealed, we should be careful not to imagine it in the wrong way. There were no metal tools, there were no engineered hinges, there was no mortar in the European sense, no concrete, no industrial materials of any kind. The sealing was done with the materials that the country provided and with the techniques that had been refined over many tens of thousands of years. What we know from the few measurements that have been done on the outside is that the slab itself was almost certainly moved using the simple but very effective method of careful lifting with poles and ropes made from twisted plant fiber. Heavy stones in northern Australia have been moved this way for various purposes, for as long as there have been people there to move them. The work is slow. It requires the cooperation of several adults working together, but it is entirely possible without any machinery at all, and it leaves no metal traces, no scrape marks of the kind that a modern tool would make. The cement around the edges, as we mentioned, is a mixture of ground or crushed termite mound, certain ashes from particular kinds of wood, and plant resin. This is not a generic mixture. The exact recipe varies in subtle ways from one region to another and from one purpose to another, and the people who used it knew which mixture worked best for which job. For sealing something that needed to last, the recipe would have been a particular one, and whoever applied it would have done so with the knowledge that they were making a kind of bond that, if everything went right, would still be there in 1,000 years. The lining of the chamber, if there is one, we do not know about directly because no one has gone inside. But based on what is known from other sealed sites in the broader region and from the techniques that were used in similar work elsewhere on the continent, it is reasonable to imagine that the inside of the chamber might be lined, at least in part, with sheets of bark or with layers of woven material made from various plant fibers. These would have been chosen for their durability and for their resistance to insects and moisture, and they would have served to protect whatever was placed inside from the slow effects of the surrounding stone. The whole project, the moving of the slab, the mixing of the cement, the placing of whatever was placed inside, the careful sealing of the edges, would have taken time. Perhaps several days, perhaps a longer ceremony stretching across many days, with the actual physical sealing being only one part of a much larger event. We do not know. The traditional owners may know or may not. Some things have been passed down, some things have been lost, some things have been deliberately not shared. Now consider for a moment the strange contrast with modern technology. We live in a time when sealing things is supposed to be one of the things that human beings do best. We have airlocks, we have vacuum chambers, we have hermetic seals made of various polymers. We have metal containers welded shut and tested with helium leak detectors. And yet, very few of the things we seal today, with all of that technology, will still be reliably sealed in 1,000 years. Most of our plastics will have begun to break down. Most of our welds will have started to oxidize. Most of our designs simply do not anticipate that kind of timescale. But a slab of stone leaned in just the right way, with the careful packing of natural cement around the edges, can apparently last 1,000 years without difficulty. The people who made the chamber did not have our materials. They did not need them. They had something better. They had time and patience and a deep understanding of the materials they did have. And they used those things to do something that, by any reasonable standard, was more durable than most of what we manage to do today. 12. The patience of the people who made it. There is a quality in much of the traditional knowledge of the Northern Australian peoples that is hard to put into words, but that is worth pausing on. It is a quality of patience, a quality of being unhurried, a quality of doing things when they need to be done in their proper time and at their proper pace without any sense that they need to be rushed. You can see this in the rock art, where some of the finer paintings clearly took many hours or even many days to complete. You can see it in the fire management, which is not a matter of putting out fires once they start, but of starting and tending small fires at the right times of year, so that no big fire ever becomes necessary. You can see it in the management of food resources, where certain plants and animals are gathered only at certain times and only in certain quantities, so that the country continues to provide year after year and generation after generation. The sealing of the chamber would have been an act in the same tradition. It would not have been a hurried thing, done in an afternoon to get a job out of the way. It would have been a considered thing, planned across many discussions, done with the proper ceremonies, witnessed by the proper people. The participants would have known at every stage exactly what they were doing and why. They would have known what materials to use, what words to say, what songs to sing if singing was required, what offerings to make if offerings were part of it. The whole thing would have been deeply embedded in a wider practice of knowing how to do things properly. And then, when it was done, they would have walked away, not in a hurry, not with any anxiety about whether they had done it right. They would have walked away the way people in that tradition walk away from completed work, with the calm certainty that what needed to be done had been done, and they would have gone on with the rest of their lives. They would have hunted, gathered, told stories, raised children, watched the seasons turn. The chamber would have receded in their minds from the foreground of their attention to the background. It would have been there in the country with its proper place in the songline, but it would not have required ongoing thought. It was finished. That is a very different relationship to a piece of work than most of us in the modern world are used to. We are accustomed to projects that need constant attention, infrastructure that needs constant maintenance, possessions that need constant upkeep. The chamber, by contrast, was made in such a way that it required no further attention at all. Once sealed, it was simply sealed. It did not need to be checked on. It did not need to be repaired. It did not need anything. It just was, and so it has remained for 1,000 years. While the people who knew about it lived their lives and died, and their children lived and died, and their children's children, and on for 40 generations, the chamber has needed nothing from anyone. It has simply continued. 13. The neighboring caves and what is known about them. The chamber is not alone in the country. There are other caves and shelters in the region, some quite close, some further away, and many of them have been studied to varying degrees by archaeologists in cooperation with the traditional owners. By looking at what those caves contain and how they were used, we can get some sense of the kinds of things that the people of this country, over the long span of their occupation, found important to keep, to make, to store, and sometimes to seal away. In some of the larger shelters, there are well-preserved deposits of stone tools that span thousands of years of continuous use. The bottom layers of these deposits, when carefully excavated, contain tools made in styles that are very ancient, much older than the chamber. The upper layers contain tools in more recent styles, including some that were made within the last few centuries. By looking at the changes in tool style across these layers, archaeologists can trace in broad terms how the techniques and preferences of the people changed over time. The chamber, if it was sealed 1,000 years ago, falls into a particular point along that long sequence, a point at which certain particular tool styles were dominant in the region. In other shelters, there are deposits of food remains, the bones of small animals that were hunted and brought back to be eaten, the shells of certain freshwater mussels that were collected from the rivers, the seeds and woody fragments of plants that were gathered for their food value. These remains, when they survive, give us a picture of how the people of this country ate season by season, generation by generation, across very long stretches of time. In a few of the more remote caves, there are deposits of more particular kinds, ochre of various colors, gathered and stored for use in painting and ceremony. Bundles of fiber, sometimes twisted into rope, sometimes woven into bags or nets. Stone slabs that have been pecked or engraved with patterns. Wooden objects where the dry conditions of the cave have allowed wood to survive, in carved or shaped forms whose purpose is sometimes obvious and sometimes mysterious. And in a very small number of cases, there are caves or chambers that show signs of having been deliberately closed off. Not all of them have been studied. Some of them have been left alone at the request of the traditional owners, with no investigation at all. Some have been studied only at a distance with the use of non-invasive techniques. A very small number have been carefully opened with full consultation and proper procedures, and what was found inside has been recorded with great respect. Our chamber belongs to the family of deliberately closed off sites. It is not unique in that respect, but it is, as far as anyone knows, one of the more carefully sealed examples, and it is one that the traditional owners have particularly asked to be left alone. Whatever is in there is theirs in the deepest sense of the word, and whatever is in there will remain in there for as long as they decide. 14. The ground-penetrating radar surveys. In the early years of the 21st century, with the permission and active participation of the traditional owners, a small team of researchers from an Australian university brought ground-penetrating radar to the site. The aim was not to invade the chamber, but simply to learn what could be learned from the outside, in a way that would leave the chamber itself untouched. Ground-penetrating radar, for those who have not encountered it before, is a fairly simple idea. A small unit, often mounted on wheels or carried by hand, sends radio waves into the ground. Most of the energy passes straight through, but some of it bounces back from interfaces in the ground, places where one kind of material meets another. The unit measures the bounce-back signals and uses them to build up a picture of what is underneath the surface. The picture is not as clear as a photograph. It looks more like a fuzzy sketch, with shapes and edges that have to be interpreted carefully. But for finding voids in solid rock, it works remarkably well. The researchers brought the radar to the chamber. They set up their equipment with care, taking great pains not to damage the slab or the cement or the rock around it. They worked slowly. They took readings from many different angles. They recorded everything carefully. And after several days of patient work, they had built up a rough picture of what lay behind the slab. The chamber, according to the radar, is not large. It is perhaps the size of a small room, perhaps 3 or 4 meters across at its widest point, with a ceiling that is irregular and that varies in height from about a meter to perhaps 2 meters. The walls of the chamber appear to be the natural rock of the rise, partly shaped by hand, partly left as it was when the chamber was first carved out. The floor is, as far as the radar can tell, fairly flat with a slight dip towards one end. And inside the chamber, the radar saw something. Not nothing, something. The exact shape of what was seen has been described by the researchers only in very general terms, partly because the radar image is itself imprecise, and partly because, in agreement with the traditional owners, the details have not been published in any wide forum. What can be said publicly is that the chamber is not empty. There is something inside, possibly several somethings, possibly arranged in a particular way, possibly with one larger object near the center and smaller objects around it. But this is at the edge of what the radar can tell us. The exact nature of the contents remains, by the radar alone, unknown. The researchers, when they had finished their work, packed up their equipment and walked away. The slab was untouched, the cement was undisturbed. The chamber was, as far as could be told from the outside, exactly as it had been when they arrived. They had learned what they could learn without crossing the threshold, and then they had stopped because to continue would have meant breaking a promise. Their data sits today in a research archive. It is not secret. Researchers with the proper permissions can see it, but the chamber itself remains untouched. 15. The seismic readings. Some years after the radar work, a different team of researchers brought a different kind of equipment to the chamber. This time the technique was seismic. Small sensors were placed on the rock around the chamber, and a series of very gentle tapping signals were sent into the rock from a small distance away. The sensors recorded how the waves traveled through the stone, how they bounced off interfaces, how long they took to return. By combining many such measurements, the team was able to refine the picture that the radar had begun. The seismic data confirmed several things that the radar had suggested. The chamber is roughly where the radar said it was. It is roughly the size the radar suggested. It contains something or things that produce different reflections from the surrounding stone. And the slab at the entrance is, indeed, in close contact with the stone of the rise on most of its edges, with the cement filling the small gaps where the contact is less perfect. The seismic data also added some new pieces of information. The chamber is not perfectly dry. There appears to be a small amount of moisture in the floor area, perhaps a few percent by volume. This is normal for the kind of stone the chamber is set into, which can hold a certain amount of water in its pores. The moisture is unlikely to be enough to cause significant damage to anything inside, but it is enough to suggest that the chamber has a particular microclimate of its own, slightly cooler and slightly damper than the open country outside. The seismic data also suggested that there might be a very small additional cavity just off to one side of the main chamber, a kind of side chamber, or perhaps just a deep niche cut into the wall. The team could not be sure whether this was a deliberately made feature or simply a natural irregularity in the rock, but it was there. And if it was deliberate, it raises the question of why it was made and what, if anything, might be in it. Once again, the researchers packed up their equipment. Once again, they walked away. The chamber was untouched, the data was added to the archive, and the questions, as always, remained. 16. The magnetic surveys. There has been at least one survey of the magnetic properties of the country around the chamber. This was not done in the hope of seeing through the rock to whatever is inside, because magnetic surveys of that kind do not work well for that purpose, but rather to map the broader stone country and to see whether the chamber sits in any particular relationship to features of the underlying geology. What the survey found was modest but interesting. The chamber sits at a point where the underlying rock changes very slightly in its magnetic character. There is a soft edge in the magnetic map that runs through the country at this point, marking a place where the very ancient sandstone meets a different ancient deposit. The chamber is right on that edge, or very close to it. It is, in geological terms, at a kind of boundary. This may or may not be significant. The people who placed the chamber were not, as far as we know, equipped with instruments that could measure magnetic fields. They could not have known in any technical sense that this was a magnetic boundary, but they did know the country in the way that people who have lived in a country for many generations know it. They knew which rocks felt right for which purposes. They knew where the water flowed and where it did not. They knew where things grew well and where they did not. It is at least possible that they recognized by the practical evidence of how the country behaved that this was a special spot, even if they did not describe it in modern scientific terms. Or it may be a coincidence. The boundary is real, but the chamber may have been placed here for other reasons. Perhaps it was simply a convenient rise. Perhaps it was on the songline at this point. Perhaps the cave already existed in some form, having been worn out of the stone by the slow action of water, and the people simply chose to seal what was already there. Without opening the chamber, we cannot know, but the soft, quiet edge is in the magnetic map, and the chamber is right next to it, and the country knows. The country always knew. 17. Comparing the chamber to other sites worldwide. It is sometimes tempting when we hear about a sealed chamber somewhere to compare it to other famous sealed chambers from history. The royal tombs of ancient Egypt, sealed for thousands of years and then opened by archaeologists. The buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, sealed under volcanic ash and then carefully uncovered. The hidden libraries of the Dunhuang Cave complex in western China, sealed for centuries and then rediscovered. The buried treasure of various medieval kings, hidden away and then sometimes recovered. But the comparison only goes so far. Most of the famous sealed sites of the world were made to hide something that the makers thought was valuable. And they were made by societies that were, in various ways, on a trajectory of growth or change or eventual disappearance. The pharaohs were trying to protect their bodies and their treasures for the afterlife. The buried cities were not deliberately sealed at all, but were caught by natural disaster. The libraries were sealed for political reasons, to protect texts from disturbance, with the assumption that they would one day be reopened. Our chamber is different. It was not made by a society that was about to disappear. The people who made it did not vanish. Their descendants are still on the country today, and the same chamber in the same place has been continuously known to them for 40 generations. It was not sealed in panic or in haste to hide something from invaders. It was sealed as part of the ordinary considered practice of a society that knew its country very well and that had a particular way of doing things. And perhaps most importantly, our chamber has not been opened. Even now, after 1,000 years, even with all of our modern technologies and all of our scientific curiosity, the chamber remains closed, not because we have failed to find it or because we cannot reach it, but because the people whose country it is on have asked with calm and with reason that it not be opened, and we have by and large listened. That in itself is a kind of historical achievement. It is not common in the long history of contact between Western archaeology and the sealed sites of other peoples that the sealed sites have been left sealed. Far more often, they have been opened, sometimes with great care and sometimes with very little. Our chamber has been an exception, and that may, in the end, turn out to be the most interesting thing about it. Not what it contains, but the fact that it remains closed by collective human decision in the modern world. The most respectful thing that has been done to it is nothing at all. 18. Theories about what is inside. People do, of course, speculate. It would be strange if they did not. A sealed chamber that has not been opened in 1,000 years invites the imagination, and the imagination is not always patient. So various ideas have been put forward by researchers and by others about what might be inside. The most cautious theory, and probably the most likely, is that the chamber contains ceremonial objects, things that were important to the people of the country, perhaps to a particular clan or to a particular set of families, perhaps related to specific rituals or stories. Such objects might include carefully wrapped bundles, decorated stones, woven items, painted objects of wood or bark, ochre stored in containers, items associated with particular ceremonies that may or may not still be conducted today. These would be objects of cultural and spiritual significance, not necessarily impressive in any material sense, but profoundly meaningful within their tradition. A second theory is that the chamber contains the remains of a particular ancestor or ancestors. Burial practices across northern Australia have varied widely from place to place and from time to time, but in some traditions, the bodies of important people have been placed in sealed locations after appropriate preparation. If the chamber is a burial site of this kind, it may contain a particular person's remains, perhaps wrapped in bark or in particular materials, perhaps accompanied by objects that belong to that person or that were associated with their role in the community. This is a possibility that is taken seriously by some researchers, although it cannot be confirmed without opening the chamber. A third theory is that the chamber contains a kind of cultural deposit, things that, for one reason or another, the people of the country wished to set apart from the world. Items that had become too sacred to be used in daily life, or that had outlived their original purpose but could not simply be discarded, or that needed to be removed from circulation for reasons that made sense within the tradition. Such a chamber would function, in a sense, as a kind of archive of the spirit, holding things that mattered and that needed to be kept in a proper way. A fourth theory, less often discussed but occasionally mentioned, is that the chamber contains records of a kind, not written records in any European sense, but perhaps painted objects, or carved tablets, or arrangements of stones, or other forms of physical memory that recorded particular knowledge. Knowledge that was important to preserve, but that for some reason was not appropriate to keep in active circulation. We know that there are forms of recorded knowledge in Northern Australian traditions that go beyond what is usually recognized by outsiders. It is at least possible that the chamber holds some of this. A fifth theory, occasionally raised but not very widely supported, is that the chamber is empty. That is, that the chamber was sealed not because of what was placed inside, but because the act of sealing was itself the point. That the chamber represents a particular kind of mark on the country, a kind of statement that has nothing to do with contents and everything to do with the place itself. This is an interesting idea, but it does not fit very well with the radar and seismic data, which suggests that there is something inside, not nothing. And there are wilder theories, sometimes voiced by outsiders with more imagination than knowledge. Theories about hidden treasures of gold or precious stones, none of which makes any sense in the context of a culture that did not use gold or accumulate precious stones as wealth. Theories about lost technologies, which similarly miss the point. Theories about visitors from elsewhere, which belong more to the realm of fantasy than of serious consideration. These theories tell us much more about the people who hold them than about the chamber. What is interesting is that all the more sensible theories, the ones grounded in what we actually know about the culture and the country, agree on one thing. Whatever is in the chamber, it matters. It mattered to the people who placed it there. It mattered enough to be sealed away. And whatever it has been mattering quietly in the dark for 1,000 years. 19. The role of women in the country. When we speak about the people who lived in the country 1,000 years ago and who placed and sealed the chamber, it is easy to fall into the trap of imagining only the men. Western histories have, for a long time, tended to focus on the visible and public roles of men in non-Western societies, and to ignore or underestimate the roles of women. In the cultures of Northern Australia, this would be a serious mistake. Women have always been, and remain, central to the cultural and ceremonial life of the country. Different traditions in different parts of the North have organized these roles in different ways, but in general, the practices and knowledge of the country are not the property of one gender alone. Some knowledge is held primarily by men. Some knowledge is held primarily by women. Some is shared. And the deep work of holding the country together, of remembering it, of teaching the next generation, has always been work done by women and by men together in their different and complementary ways. The sealing of the chamber, if we try to imagine it, would not have been an exclusively male affair. There would have been particular roles for women in whatever ceremony or sequence of ceremonies accompanied the work. Perhaps women prepared the materials, gathered the resin, mixed the cement. Perhaps women carried particular objects to the site, or sang particular songs, or witnessed particular moments. Perhaps women conducted parts of the ceremony that men could not be present for, just as men conducted parts that women could not be present for. The exact arrangement is something that the traditional owners know in whatever detail has been passed down, and that the rest of us do not need to know. What we should know at the very least is that the chamber is not a male chamber, in the sense that some sealed sites in other cultures have been. It is a chamber that belongs to the country, and the country belongs to all of its people, in their proper roles and proper relationships. If there are objects inside that are particularly associated with women's traditions, that does not mean men cannot speak of the chamber. If there are objects associated with men's traditions, That does not mean women cannot speak of it either. The chamber is bigger than any one role. The chamber is, in some sense, a place where many roles come together. This matters in our story tonight because it reminds us that the people of this country, then and now, are not a monolithic group. They are individuals with relationships and roles and personalities and quirks and disagreements and loves and fears, like any other people. The chamber was not sealed by an abstract collective. It was sealed by particular people in particular families with particular names who had spent their lives in this country and who knew it intimately. We do not know who they were, but they were people, just like the people you know, who lived their lives, completed this work, and walked on. 20. The slow rhythm of falling asleep with this story. Maybe by now your eyes are starting to feel a little heavy. Maybe the room around you has begun to dim, or maybe you are listening with your eyes already closed. Either way, that is fine. That is, in many ways, the whole point of telling a story like this in the way we are telling it tonight. The chamber does not need your alertness. The chamber does not require your focused attention. The chamber has waited 1,000 years, and it can wait for you to fall asleep, and it can keep waiting while you sleep, and it will still be there when you wake up. So let yourself drift if you would like to. Let the words become less important, and the rhythm of the words become more important. Let the names of the seasons and the descriptions of the country and the slow, patient details of the radar surveys and the magnetic edges become a kind of soft pillow under your thoughts. The country we are speaking of has been a soft pillow for thousands of generations of people. And it can be one for you too, just for a little while, just for tonight. If you are still with me, let me share a small thought before we go further. Imagine for a moment that you are walking very slowly through the country we have been describing. The sun is low, the air is warm, the grass under your feet is dry and pale. There is the smell of paper bark in the breeze, faint but unmistakable. You can hear somewhere far off the call of a kookaburra. Closer, you can hear the small clicks and rustles of insects in the late afternoon. Your steps are slow, there is no hurry. You come, after a while, to a low rise. The rise is not dramatic. It is just a swell of stone country, a little higher than the land around it, with some small trees clinging to the edges. As you walk past, you notice, almost by accident, a slab of stone leaning against the side of the rise. The slab is weathered. It looks as if it has been there a long time. You might not even notice it at all if your eye did not happen to catch a slight pattern, a small pecked design on the surface of the slab. You do not approach, you do not touch. You stand for a moment in the warm late light looking. You know from somewhere deep inside that this is a place to be respected. You can feel it in the country around you. The country itself is telling you to walk on, so you walk on. The slab stays where it has been for 1,000 years. The country goes on around it. You go on too. And somewhere ahead, the day is settling into evening, and the stars are getting ready to come out. That is the rhythm of this story. There is no climax. There is no big reveal. There is just the slow, patient, comfortable continuation of things. The chamber will not be open tonight. The chamber will not be open tomorrow. The chamber may not be opened in our lifetimes or in our children's lifetimes or ever. And that is, in its own way, the very thing that makes the chamber what it is. If you're still with me and still happy to keep listening, a quiet reminder. The channel grows when you share these long, slow stories with someone else who likes to fall asleep to history. If you have a friend or a family member who likes this kind of thing, send them the link sometime. And if you're not yet subscribed, the subscribe button is sitting there waiting quietly, the way the chamber has been waiting, and a small tap will bring more of these long nights to you. Now we will go on. 21. The wider story of the Kimberley. To give some sense of the kind of country we are talking about, let us take a step back and look at one of the great regions of northern Australia in a little more detail. The Kimberley, in the far northwest of the continent, is one of the most extraordinary places on Earth. It is vast, perhaps 400,000 square kilometers in total, almost the size of Sweden, but with a human population that, even now, is only around 40,000 people, most of them concentrated in a small number of towns near the coast. The interior of the Kimberley is sandstone country, great plateaus of ancient stone cut through by gorges and rivers, dotted with rock formations that look, in places, almost too strange to be real. The Bungle Bungle Range, with its banded beehive-shaped domes, is one of the more famous of these formations, and it has become a destination for visitors who fly in for a few days and then fly out again. But the Bungle Bungles are just one corner of a much larger landscape, most of which is far less visited. For tens of thousands of years, the Kimberley has been home to a number of distinct peoples, each with their own languages, their own country, their own traditions, their own stories. The Warora, the Ngarinyin, the Wunambal, the Bardi, the Nyul, the Bunuba, the Gunyandi, the Walmajari, and many others, each in their own places, each with their own ways. The Wandjina spirits, painted in many of the rock shelters of the Western Kimberley, belong particularly to the Warora, the Ngarinyin, and the Wunambal, and they are central to the law and the country of those peoples. Our chamber is not in the Kimberley itself, but it is in country that shares many features with the Kimberley. Sandstone, long history, deep tradition, continued occupation, rich rock art, careful ceremony. The story of one kind of country in the top end is, in many ways, the story of all of them. Each particular country has its own particular features, but the broader fabric is woven from the same threads. What is interesting about the Kimberley, in the context of our story, is that researchers have, over the years, identified a number of sites there that appear to be similar to our chamber. Sites that have been sealed or carefully closed off by deliberate human action and that have not been entered by anyone for a long time. Most of these sites have not been investigated, either out of respect for the traditional owners or because the traditional owners have specifically asked for them to be left alone. A small number have been studied at a distance using the same kinds of non-invasive techniques that have been used on our chamber. The picture that emerges from these comparisons is one of a region in which the practice of sealing away certain things at certain times appears to have been, if not common, then at least known. Not every clan did it, not every generation did it. But here and there, across the long history of the country, particular acts of sealing were undertaken for particular reasons in particular places. Our chamber is part of this wider pattern. It is not unique. It is one of perhaps several, although it is one of the more carefully documented and one of the more visible to outside researchers. The Kimberley is a long way from the area we are concerned with tonight, but the connection in spirit is close. The country in both places has been treated the same way. The chamber sits inside a tradition that stretches across a continent's worth of land, with all of its variations and all of its specific local features, but with a shared sense of what country is and how country should be approached. 22. The sky above the country. Let us look up for a moment. The country we have been describing is far from any major city, far from any major source of artificial light. At night, the sky above it is one of the darkest and clearest in the world. When the moon is down and there is no cloud, the stars come out in numbers that are difficult to believe if you have lived your life in cities. The Milky Way arches across the sky in a wide pale band, with details and dark patches visible to the unaided eye that, in most modern places, you would need a telescope to see. The people of Northern Australia have known these stars for as long as there have been people in the country. They have given them names. They have woven them into stories. They have used them to mark the passage of the seasons, to navigate at night, to keep track of certain events that happen in the country and in the world. The astronomy of the traditional peoples of Australia is, in many ways, just as detailed and as carefully recorded as the astronomy of the early agricultural civilizations of Europe and Asia, although it was recorded in different ways and for partly different purposes. 1,000 years ago, the night sky above our chamber would have looked, in most respects, almost identical to the way it looks tonight. The fixed stars are very nearly the same. The patterns of the constellations are very nearly the same. The Milky Way crosses the sky in very nearly the same place. The only things that are noticeably different are the very slow movements of certain stars as they shift across the centuries and the position of the celestial pole, which has moved slightly due to the slow wobble of the Earth's axis. These are subtle changes. A person standing in the country on a clear night 1,000 years ago would have seen what you would see tonight if you stood in the same place. This continuity matters. It means that whoever placed and sealed the chamber, when they stepped outside and looked up at the night sky, saw the same stars that we see in nearly the same places. They knew those stars. They had their own ways of naming them, their own stories about them, their own ways of using them to organize their lives. And when they went home from the chamber after the sealing was done, the same stars went home with them in the sky overhead. If you go out into very dark country in Northern Australia on a moonless night, and you look up, you can feel something that is hard to feel anywhere else. You can feel how small you are, you can feel how short your life is, and you can feel at the same time how richly connected you are to everyone who has ever stood under that same sky. The stars do not care that you are small or that your life is short. The stars are just there. They were there before you, they will be there after you, and they were there above the people who placed the chamber 1,000 years ago on a quiet night in the country when the sealing was done and the work was complete, and the only thing left to do was to look up. 23. The animals that have visited the chamber. In the 1,000 years since the chamber was sealed, many animals have come and gone in the country around it. Some have come close to the slab, some have passed within a meter or two. Some, the smaller ones, have climbed across it. None, as far as we can tell, have disturbed it. Lizards have been frequent visitors. Northern Australia has many species of lizards, from small skinks that flash across hot rocks, to medium-sized geckos that come out at dusk, to large goannas that can grow to the size of a small dog. All of them, in their various ways, would have encountered the chamber over 1,000 years. Lizards sunning themselves on the slab in the early morning. Lizards hiding in the small gaps and shadows around the edges. goannas walking past with their slow, purposeful sway, sometimes pausing to flick a tongue at the air. None of this has any effect on the chamber itself. The lizards have come and gone. The slab remains. Snakes have also passed by. Northern Australia is home to a number of snake species, including several that are highly venomous and several that are large but harmless. King browns, taipans, olive pythons, mulga snakes, water pythons. All of them go about their business in the country, hunting small mammals and reptiles, basking in the sun, hiding in cool places during the heat of the day. The chamber is a fine, cool place in some seasons, and snakes have probably curled up in the shadow of the slab on many occasions over the centuries. But the slab is too well sealed for any snake to enter the chamber itself. The animals stay outside even when they find a comfortable spot just at the edge. Smaller mammals have come through, wallabies of various species, bandicoots in the cooler seasons when they are active, possums perhaps in the trees nearby, various kinds of native rodents. All of them have lived their lives in the country, mostly without ever noticing the chamber at all, but occasionally passing close to it, or pausing in its shadow, or moving along the small worn paths that lead near it. Birds, of course, in great numbers. Birds nest in the trees nearby and call across the country at dawn and dusk. Some birds may even have built nests on or near the slab, in cracks where the stone meets the rock of the rise. Bird droppings have left their faint traces on the upper surface of the slab over the years, although the weathering of the stone has long since absorbed most of them. The birds have not disturbed the slab, they have simply lived around it. And very occasionally there have been dingoes. The dingo has been part of the Australian landscape for several thousand years, and dingoes with their soft padding feet have certainly passed by the chamber. A dingo might lie down in the shade of the slab on a hot afternoon. A dingo might pause to drink at a small soak in the rock nearby. A dingo might stand for a moment looking with that calm, watchful look that dingoes have before moving on. The chamber, again, remains unchanged all this life going on around the chamber. All these small acts of being alive going on in the country, and the chamber in the middle of it all, simply being a chamber. Not part of the lives of the animals, not part of the daily concerns of any creature. Just there in its place, holding its silence. 24. Small things in the rock. If you were to look closely at the rock around the chamber, you would see, in the tiny details of the surface, an entire smaller world. The sandstone of northern Australia is alive in ways that are not always obvious at a glance. There are organisms that live on and in the surface of the rock, ancient and very slow forms of life that play their own small part in the long story of the country. There are microscopic algae and lichens that form thin crusts on the surface of the sandstone, especially in places where there is a little moisture, even seasonal moisture. These crusts are sometimes called rock varnish or desert varnish, and they grow very slowly. They take their color from the minerals they incorporate as they grow, and over many years they build up a kind of natural layer on the surface of the stone that can be dated in a rough way by its thickness and composition. On the slab of our chamber, there is some of this rock varnish in places where the surface is sheltered enough for the slow growth to take place. Researchers have looked at it briefly in the course of the other surveys and have found that it is consistent with a surface that has been exposed to the open air for around 1,000 years. Not for a much shorter time when there would be little or no varnish, not for a much longer time when there would be more. About 1,000 years, give or take, another small piece of evidence supporting the date. In the small cracks of the rock, there are sometimes tiny invertebrates, pseudoscorpions, which are not actual scorpions but small relatives, are mostly harmless to humans and important in the small food chains of dry stone country. Various species of mites and tiny spiders, small beetles that live their entire lives within a single crevice. These creatures go about their work in the rock, hunting smaller things, hiding from larger things, breeding when conditions are right. None of them care about the chamber. None of them know it exists in any sense that makes sense to apply to such small lives. But they are there, and they are part of the country, and they have been part of the country for as long as the chamber has been sealed. There are also, in the spaces around the rock, small plants, mosses in the shaded places, a few ferns in the deeper cracks where moisture lingers, small succulents that store water in their thick leaves and survive the long dries, tiny flowers that bloom for just a few days at the right time of year and then disappear again. All of these plants live their lives close to the rock, drawing what they need from the cracks and the crevices, and they have done so for centuries. The country, then, is not a still life. It is full of small, slow movements. It is full of small living things going about their business. The chamber, in the middle of all of this, is the still point. The chamber is the place where nothing is happening, while everything around it goes on happening at its own quiet pace. 25. The traditional owners today. The country that contains the chamber is, like all of Australia, the country of particular traditional owners. These are the people whose ancestors lived on this land, whose connection to it is unbroken across the generations, and whose authority over what happens on the country is recognized in increasing measure by Australian law as well as by their own traditions. Native title in Australia has had a long and sometimes difficult history, and the details vary from place to place. But the general direction over the past few decades has been towards a recognition that the original peoples of the continent have rights and responsibilities in their country that did not disappear simply because other people arrived. In many parts of northern Australia, including the broad region where our chamber lies, native title has been recognized, often after long and careful court proceedings, and the traditional owners now have, among other things, a formal role in decisions that are made about their country. This means, in practical terms, that researchers cannot simply walk in and study a site like the chamber. They have to ask. They have to explain what they want to do. They have to listen carefully to what the traditional owners say in response. If the answer is yes, with conditions, they have to abide by the conditions. If the answer is no, they have to accept it. The chamber has been studied to the limited extent it has been only because the traditional owners gave permission, and only under the conditions that they specified. Those conditions include things like the privacy of the precise location, the restriction on opening the chamber under any circumstances, the requirement that any data collected be reviewed by the traditional owners before publication, and the general principle that the chamber is to be treated with the same respect that it has been treated by the people of the country for the last 1,000 years. This is, in its own way, a kind of historical experiment. It is an example of what is possible when the descendants of the people who built a site retain the authority to decide what happens to it. The chamber is studied but not opened. It is known but not exposed. It is part of the world's broader heritage in the sense that everyone alive today benefits from knowing that it exists, but it is also and primarily the heritage of one particular people, and they are the ones who decide what to do with it. For most of the people who live on the country today, the chamber is part of the ordinary fabric of life. It is not something they think about every day. It is just there in its place, the way certain trees are there in their places, or certain rocks, or certain bends in the river. People know it is there. People respect it. People go about their lives much as their ancestors did, in country that contains, among many other things, this one small sealed space. 26. The patience required to wait. It is worth thinking for a moment about what it takes to wait. Not just to wait for a day or a year, but to wait for 1,000 years, to wait without checking, to wait without verifying, to wait without ever in all those years going back to look. For most of human history, in most cultures, this kind of waiting has been very rare. People have generally been impatient. They have wanted to know, they have wanted to see. They have wanted to open the box or unwrap the package or dig up the buried thing just to make sure it is still there. The history of archaeology, in particular, is largely a history of people who could not wait, who excavated and dug and pried open and disturbed in the name of curiosity or science or sometimes simply greed. The chamber has been waited with by the people of its country in a way that is genuinely unusual. The waiting has not been passive, it has been active. It has been a choice made again and again, generation after generation. The choice has been made by people who could, if they had wanted to, have opened the chamber at any time. They had the means, they had the access, they had the knowledge of where it was. They simply chose in each generation not to do so. This is the harder kind of patience. It is not the patience of someone who cannot do something. It is the patience of someone who could do something and decides not to. And it requires a kind of cultural memory that holds across the generations the reasons for the decision. It requires that each generation be taught not only that the chamber exists, but why it should not be opened, and that the teaching be effective enough that the next generation continues the practice. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the chamber. Not the chamber itself, but the long chain of human decisions that has kept it closed. 1,000 years of saying no in a quiet way, without drama, without difficulty. 1,000 years of choosing to leave it alone. 1,000 years of patience. If you can take anything from the chamber's story, perhaps it could be this. Not all questions need to be answered. Not all mysteries need to be solved. Not all sealed things need to be opened. There is a kind of wisdom in leaving certain things as they are and trusting that they are where they need to be and going on with the rest of your life, knowing that whatever is in there is, in some sense, exactly where it should be. 27. The light at different times of day. Different times of the slab and the chamber sit in the country, and the country has its light. The light changes throughout the day and across the seasons and across the years, and the chamber has been lit by all of it in countless small variations for 1,000 years. In the very early morning, before the sun has risen over the horizon, the country is in a soft grey-blue light. The slab is just a darker shape against a slightly less dark background. The trees nearby are silhouettes. The first birds begin to call, and a faint mist sometimes hangs in the lower country, although in much of the year the air is too dry for any mist at all. The slab leans where it has always leaned. The cement holds. Then the sun begins to come up. In the tropics, the dawn is short. The sun rises quickly, and the light goes from grey-blue to gold in the space of a few minutes. The slab takes on a warm tone briefly, as the sun catches the side of the rise where it sits. The pecked marks on the surface become slightly more visible. The shadows are long and slanting. The country, for a brief moment, looks almost theatrical before the light becomes flat and brilliant under the climbing sun. Through the middle of the day, the light is hard and the heat is heavy. The slab is in shadow on its side mostly, but the surrounding rock is bright. The colors of the country wash out. Everything seems to settle into a kind of bleached, slow stillness. The lizards come out and bask, the birds become quieter. The chamber behind the slab remains the same cool, dark space it always is. The temperature inside, if anyone could measure it without disturbing it, would be remarkably stable, varying only slightly between the wettest and driest parts of the year. In the afternoon, the light begins to soften again. The shadows lengthen on the other side. The colors of the country deepen. By the late afternoon, in the dry season especially, the light becomes one of the most beautiful things you can imagine. The red and orange tones of the sandstone glow. The thin trees catch the light through their leaves. The slab takes on its evening color, a warm, dusty pink at the bottom, deepening to amber at the top. The pecked marks become clearer again. The country looks for these long minutes like a painting. Then the sun sets. The light fades, the colors pull back into the rock. The slab becomes a dark shape against a darker background. The first stars appear, and the country settles into its night. 1,000 years of these days, 1,000 years of these evenings, 1,000 years of these nights. The chamber has been bathed in all of this light, in all of these colors, in all of these soft transitions, and the chamber all the while has remained exactly what it is, closed, sealed, patient. There, 28, the rain on the slab. When the rains come, and they always come, the country fills up with water. The dry water courses that have been empty for months suddenly run again. The water holes that have been low and stagnant suddenly become deep and clear. The country, which has been pale gold, turns green almost overnight. And the slab in front of the chamber gets wet. Rain in the top end is not a polite, gentle thing. It is a serious affair. When a wet season storm passes over, the rain can fall so hard that you can hardly see 20 meters in front of you. The drops are large. They hit the rock with a sound that is half a tap and half a thud. Within a few minutes, every surface is soaked. Water runs off in sheets. Small temporary streams form in places where there is no stream at any other time of year. The country becomes a network of moving water. The slab takes its share of this. Water hits the upper surface and runs down. Water finds the small irregularities in the stone and flows along them. Water reaches the cement at the edges of the slab and is mostly turned aside, although a tiny amount may, over many years, work its way into very small cracks. Most of the water, however, simply runs off around the slab into the ground at the base of the rise, where it sinks into the rocky soil or runs on to find a lower point. The cement, as we have mentioned, was made carefully. One of the things it was designed to do was to handle the wet. The plant resin in the mixture is somewhat water resistant. The crushed termite mound is bound tightly enough that water does not easily wash it out, and the cement has been tested by 1,000 years of wet seasons and has so far passed every test. There are no significant gaps. There are no signs of significant water damage to the slab or the rock around it. Inside the chamber, the radar and seismic data suggest the conditions are remarkably stable even during the heaviest rains. The chamber is below the level of the slab, set back into the rock of the rise, and the ceiling keeps the inside dry. There is the small percentage of moisture that the seismic data picked up, which probably comes from the natural moisture in the rock itself, not from the wet season rain. The wet season comes and goes, and the chamber inside hardly notices. If you could be there during a wet season storm with permission in the proper way, you would see the rain hammering down on the slab, and you would see the cement holding, and you would feel the immense indifference of the chamber to all the noise and water and drama of the storm. And then the storm would pass, and the sun would come out again, and the country would steam gently as the heat returned, and the slab would dry, and nothing inside the chamber would have changed. 29. The fires that have passed by. We have already mentioned briefly that the people of the country use fire to manage the land. They have been doing this for tens of thousands of years, and the technique is sophisticated, varied, and carefully tuned to the seasons and the particular country being burned. The general idea is to light small fires in the cooler, damper parts of the year, when the fires will move through the grass and undergrowth without becoming too large, and in the process to reduce the buildup of fuel that might otherwise feed a much larger and more destructive fire in the hot, dry months. Over 1,000 years, many fires have passed by the chamber, most of them small, most of them moving slowly, most of them lit deliberately by people who knew exactly where the chamber was and exactly how close the fire could come without causing any harm. The fires have moved through the dry grass around the rise. The fires have crackled in the small shrubs and saplings. The fires have curled the leaves and blackened the bark of the larger trees. And the fires have passed on, leaving the slab and the chamber undisturbed. The slab itself is stone. Stone does not burn. The cement is largely made of inorganic materials, with only a small amount of plant resin in the mix. And that resin has long since hardened to the point where small surface fires would not affect it. The contents of the chamber, whatever they are protected by the slab and the rock and the sealed edges. A small grass fire passing by the outside would have no effect on what is inside. But fire still has its role in the story. Fire is one of the ways the country has been kept healthy. Fire is one of the ways the people of the country have stayed connected to it, by being out on the land at the proper times, lighting the proper fires, knowing where the chamber is, and respecting it. The fires are not random events that have happened to the country. They are part of the relationship between the people and the country, and the chamber sits inside that relationship. There have, no doubt, been a few larger fires too, over the course of 1,000 years. Years of unusual conditions where a fire might have moved more quickly or burned hotter than was wanted. Even in those cases, the slab and the chamber have, by all evidence, come through without damage. Stone country is, in general, fairly resistant to even severe fires, and the chamber's particular setting in a sheltered fold of stone has protected it further. Each fire, like each season, like each storm, has come and gone. The slab has stayed, the cement has held, the chamber inside has been undisturbed, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. The country has gone on doing what country does, and the chamber has gone on being what the chamber is. Nothing very dramatic, nothing very visible, nothing very important to the outside world. Just there, just being itself, for 1,000 years. 30. The thoughts of the people who placed it. We cannot know with any certainty what the people who placed and sealed the chamber were thinking as they did the work. They left no written records because their culture did not record in writing. They left no formal monuments in the European sense. They left only the chamber itself and the slab and the marks on the slab and the rock art in the nearby shelters and the song lines that passed through the country and the long chain of memory that has carried their work forward to us. But we can imagine, in a gentle way, what they might have felt. They were people. They had hopes and fears and loves and worries like all people. They knew that what they were doing was important. They knew that what they were placing in the chamber would not be seen again by them or by anyone else for a very long time. They knew that they were making a kind of promise to their own ancestors and to the generations that would come after, that the work they were doing now would last. Perhaps some of them felt a kind of sadness as the slab was set into place and the cement was applied. Whatever was being sealed away was being separated from the world of daily life. It would no longer be touched. It would no longer be used. It would no longer be visible. There is always a small grief in such moments when something is set aside, even when the setting aside is the right thing to do. Perhaps others felt a kind of peace. The work was being done properly. The materials were good. The people doing the work knew what they were doing. The country was witnessing the act, and the country would hold it. Whatever the chamber was to contain, it would be in safe keeping in the deepest possible sense. There is a kind of relief in completing a task that has been done well. Perhaps others felt a kind of pride, not boastful pride, but the quiet pride of people who have inherited a tradition and who have managed in their generation to add to it properly. The chamber was being made and was being sealed in a way that fit into the long pattern of the people's relationship with the country. Their grandparents would have approved. Their grandparents' grandparents would have approved. The chain of approval reached back through deep time, and the people doing this work were, in their own way, extending that chain forward. We do not know who any of them were. We do not know their names. We do not know what particular families they belonged to, or what particular roles they played in their community, or what particular things they liked to eat for breakfast, or what particular things made them laugh. But they were specific people with specific lives. And the chamber they made is a small permanent mark of their existence in the country, of their having been here, of their having done this thing. The chamber is, in that sense, also a kind of memorial, although that is not its primary purpose. It is a memorial to the patience and care and skill of the people who made it. 31. The chamber and the modern world. In the modern world, the chamber is, in many ways, an outsider. It does not fit easily into any of the categories that the modern world prefers to use for things. It is not a tourist attraction. It is not a museum exhibit. It is not a publicly available archaeological site. It is not even, in any normal sense, a thing that you can visit. It is just there, in country, in its proper place, and it goes on being there regardless of what anyone in the modern world might want or expect. This makes the chamber, in a quiet way, a kind of statement, a statement about what kinds of things can exist in the world alongside all the things that we are more used to. A statement that not everything has to be open, not everything has to be available, not everything has to be ready for inspection. In an age when so much of human life is becoming visible, recorded, accessible, the chamber is a reminder that there are still things that are private. There are still things that belong to particular people in particular places, and that are not for the rest of us to see. There are still things that have been left deliberately in a state that resists the modern impulse to know everything. This is perhaps the gentlest possible form of resistance. The chamber does not protest. It does not refuse loudly. It does not put up barriers or guards. It simply continues to be what it has always been, a sealed space in a particular country, under the care of particular people, with its own particular history, in no hurry to be anything else. If the modern world ever decides collectively that everything must be opened, the chamber will be in trouble. But for now, in this small period of human history, there is a wider agreement that some things should be left as they are. The chamber benefits from this agreement. It is one of the small spaces where the modern world has, for once, decided to stop and be quiet and let something be. Long may that continue. Long may the slab lean where it leans. Long may the cement hold. Long may the chamber inside go on being whatever it is in its undisturbed darkness for as many more centuries as the world cares to give it. 32. The deep stillness inside. Imagine for a moment the inside of the chamber. We have spent a lot of time tonight talking about the outside, the slab, the cement, the rock around it, the country beyond. Let us now very gently, in our imagination only, picture what it might be like inside. There is no light. Not a single photon has reached the inside of the chamber in 1,000 years. The darkness inside is the kind of darkness that you cannot really experience in the ordinary world, because even at the bottom of the deepest cave, if you wait long enough, your eyes adapt to whatever tiny amounts of light are present, and the darkness becomes a little less complete. Inside the chamber, there are no tiny amounts of light. There is no light at all. There has been no light at all for 10 centuries. There is almost certainly no sound. The slab and the surrounding rock absorb sound very effectively. Even the loudest events outside, a clap of thunder, a tree falling, a herd of animals running past, would arrive inside the chamber, if at all, as the faintest possible vibration. Most of the time, there would be nothing, just stillness. Just the kind of silence that is so deep, it almost feels like a sound itself. The air inside, sealed by the slab and the cement, is the same air, more or less, that was inside when the chamber was sealed. 1,000-year-old breath. It has not been refreshed by any wind. It has not been moved by any breath. It has, perhaps, exchanged tiny molecules with the surrounding rock very slowly, but in any meaningful sense, it is the original air. The temperature of the air is stable, very nearly the same all year round, regulated by the great thermal mass of the surrounding stone. The humidity is steady, the pressure is steady. The conditions are as close to unchanging as conditions in our world ever get. Whatever is in the chamber sits in that air, in that darkness, in that silence. If it is a wrapped bundle, the wrapping has been doing whatever wrapping does, very slowly, for 1,000 years. If it is a stone object, the stone has been doing what stone does, which is almost nothing. If it is a wooden object, the wood has, in the stable, dry conditions, mostly been preserved with perhaps a few small changes around the surface, but with its overall form intact. If it is something else, whatever it has been there, in the same place, in the same position, for 40 generations. There is no clock in the chamber. There has been no way to mark time. The seconds have not ticked. The hours have not passed in any noticeable way. From inside the chamber, if anything inside could be aware in the way we are aware, The 1,000 years that have gone by since the sealing would not feel like 1,000 years. They would not feel like anything. They would just be a continuous, undivided, unchanging now. The chamber lives in some sense outside of time, even as the world outside has gone through all of its centuries. That is one of the things that sealed chambers do when they are sealed properly. They create small pockets of changelessness in a world that is otherwise constantly changing. They become little still places where time slows down or seems to, or perhaps does not exist in the same way as it does outside. The chamber is one of these. The chamber is, in this sense, a small island of stillness in a noisy world. 33. The wider Australian land. Let us widen our view briefly from the chamber to the country and from the country to the continent. Australia is an old land and a quiet land in many ways. Its mountains are worn down. Its rivers run slow when they run at all. Its deserts are vast and patient. Its forests, where they exist, are full of the gentle hiss of leaves and the calls of birds rather than the louder sounds of larger continents. The country as a whole has a feeling of having seen everything already and of being unsurprised by anything new. The chamber, in its small fold of stone in the north, is one tiny point on this vast, quiet continent. There are many other small points like it in different parts of the country, sites of significance to particular peoples, caves and overhangs and rock formations with their own stories, places that to outsiders look like nothing in particular, but that are to the people of the country the heart of everything. Australia is full of these places. The whole continent is, in a sense, a network of sacred geography that has been only very partially understood by the people who arrived in the last few centuries. Our chamber is one node in this network. It is connected through songlines and stories to other places in other parts of the country. The connections may not be visible on any map that you can buy in a shop, but they are real. They are as real as the connections in any other system of meaning that humans have ever built, and they are continuing. The songlines are still walked, the stories are still told, the connections are still maintained. This means that the chamber is not just an artifact in the way that an Egyptian tomb is sometimes thought of as an artifact. The chamber is part of a living system. It is part of a continuing relationship between people and country. The people are still here. The country is still here. The relationship is still here. The chamber is a small point along this living relationship, not a frozen relic from a vanished world. When we tell the story of the chamber, then, we are not telling the story of a lost civilization. We are telling part of the ongoing story of a present civilization, one that has continued without interruption for tens of thousands of years, and that continues today. The chamber is part of that civilization's history, but it is also part of its present. It is something that is being looked after right now by people who are still here in country that is still being walked. That is the kind of long, quiet, hopeful thing that the chamber represents. Not a museum piece, but a living continuity, not an ancient ruin, but a current responsibility, not something from a vanished world, but something from a world that has not vanished and is not going to vanish. The chamber is, in its way, a sign of survival, of the survival of a way of being in country that has outlasted many other ways of being. 34. The deep time ahead. We have spent much of tonight looking back to 1,000 years ago when the chamber was sealed, back further to the people who lived in the country before then, back further still to the deep time of the stone itself. Let us, just for a moment, look forward. The chamber, in its current state, could continue more or less indefinitely. The slab is stone. Stone weathers, but slowly. The cement is in good condition and could last for many more centuries. The contents of the chamber, whatever they are in stable conditions and could last as long as the chamber itself does. There is no particular reason, given the current state of affairs, why the chamber should not still be there, sealed in another 1,000 years. Imagine that. Imagine what the world might look like in 1,000 years from now. We can scarcely guess. The technologies of that future, the politics, the languages, the daily lives of the people who will be alive then are mostly unimaginable to us. But whatever else has happened, the slab will very probably still be leaning against the side of the rise. The cement will still be holding. The chamber inside will still be undisturbed. The same darkness, the same stillness, the same air, the same contents. The descendants of the traditional owners, if their long pattern of careful continuity holds, will still know about the chamber. Some of them, perhaps, will know more than others, in the way that knowledge is parceled out across the generations. They will continue to maintain the practice of not opening it. They will continue to teach the next generation. They will continue, in their patient way, to be the chamber's keepers. The country around the chamber will, hopefully, still be country. Perhaps a little changed by climate, perhaps with slightly different patterns of rain, perhaps with some new species of plants and animals, and the absence of some that are familiar today, but still in its essential character, the same old patient land, the same stone country, the same skies, the same long quiet stretches between events, and the chamber in all of this will be doing what it does. Which is nothing, which is just being there, which is just continuing. In another 10,000 years, perhaps, things will be more uncertain. Stones do shift eventually, cement does fail eventually, even the most patient seals do not last forever. But 10,000 years is a long way away. There is no need to worry about it tonight, and for tomorrow. And for many, many tomorrows after that, the chamber will be exactly as it has always been. 35. The simplest description of the chamber. If you had to describe the chamber very simply, in just a few words, you might say something like this. There is a small sealed room in the rock of northern Australia. It is about 1,000 years old. It contains something. It has not been opened. It probably will not be opened. The people who made it knew what they were doing. The people who look after it know what they are doing. The world is a better place for its existence. That is, in some ways, all that needs to be said. The chamber does not require a great speech. The chamber does not require an elaborate explanation. The chamber simply is, and the simplest description is enough. But because we have time, and because the night is long, and because there is something to be said for letting a story unfold slowly, we have spent a little longer with it tonight. We have walked around its outside. We have imagined its inside. We have considered the people who placed it and the people who look after it. We have looked at the country it sits in, the stone it is part of, the sky above it, the seasons that pass across it. We have thought about what it might contain and what it might mean. We have done all of this, not because the chamber needed us to, but because we wanted to. The chamber, in its quiet way, is a teacher. It teaches patience, it teaches respect. It teaches the value of leaving some things alone. It teaches that knowledge can be carried for a very long time without writing, without monuments, without anything more than the simple human practice of telling the next generation what they need to know. It teaches that the modern world's preference for opening everything is not the only possible relationship to the past. It teaches that there is a kind of dignity in not knowing when not knowing is the right choice. If we have learned anything tonight from this slow walk around an unopened sealed chamber in the far north of Australia, perhaps it is something like this. We do not have to know everything. We do not have to open everything. We do not have to verify everything. Some things can simply be left in their proper place with their proper people in their proper country. And sometimes in some quiet corner of the world, that is exactly the right thing to do. 36. The other sealed sites that have been opened. It is worth mentioning for context that not every sealed site in Northern Australia has been kept closed. A small number over the years have been opened with the proper permissions by archaeologists working closely with traditional owners. These have not been many, and the openings have been done with great care and with full involvement of the people whose country the sites are on. But they have happened, and they have given us a little more information about what kinds of things were sometimes placed in such sites in the broader region. What has been found in these few open sites has tended to confirm the general picture that researchers had already developed from rock art, from oral histories, and from the broader study of the cultures of the North. The open sites have contained ceremonial objects of various kinds, bundles wrapped in bark or fiber, painted stones, carved wooden items, sometimes the remains of particular individuals treated with the appropriate respect. Sometimes collections of objects that, taken together, seem to relate to a specific set of stories or practices. In every case, the openings have been done quietly. There have been no big announcements. There have been no major museum exhibitions. The objects, where they have been removed from their sites, have generally been returned or are in the process of being returned to the care of the traditional owners. The information that has been gathered has been added to the broader picture of what is known about the cultures of the region, but it has not been turned into spectacle. This is, again, a very different approach from the one that has often been taken in other parts of the world. The opening of an Egyptian tomb has historically been an event. The discovery of a sealed library or a hidden treasure has often been treated as news. The objects found inside have often gone on tour or been displayed in famous museums or been photographed for the front pages of newspapers. The opening of an Australian sealed site, by contrast, has typically been a quiet internal matter, conducted within the relationship between the people of the country and a small number of trusted researchers. Our chamber has not been one of the sites that have been opened. There is no current intention to open it. The traditional owners have asked, gently and clearly, that it remain closed, and so it remains closed. The fact that some other sites in the region have been opened in the right way does not change this. Each site is its own situation. Each set of traditional owners makes its own decisions about its own country. Our chamber's people have made their decision, and the decision has been respected, and the chamber accordingly has continued in its long undisturbed condition. What we know from the open sites helps us understand, in a general way, what kinds of things might be in our chamber, but the chamber itself remains, in its specifics, unknown, and that is, very deliberately, how it is meant to be. 37. The languages of the country. Northern Australia is home to many distinct languages. not dialects of a single tongue, but truly separate languages, as different from each other in many cases as English is from French or German. Linguists have catalogued over the years several hundred Aboriginal languages across the continent, with many dozens of them in the north alone. Some of these languages have many speakers and remain vigorous, with children learning them as a first tongue. Others have been weakened, with only older speakers remaining. A few have been lost in living memory, and many continue in various states of health in their proper places. The country containing our chamber has its own language, or perhaps several languages, depending on exactly where you draw the boundary. The exact name of the language and the people who speak it, I will not put into this story tonight, because that level of detail belongs more properly to them than to me. But I can say in general that the language is one that has been spoken in this country for as long as anyone can remember. That it has its own particular sounds, its own particular grammar, its own particular ways of describing the world, and that it carries within it the deep knowledge of the country itself. 1,000 years ago, when the chamber was sealed, the language spoken in that country would have been recognizably the ancestor of the language spoken there today. Languages do change over time, but they often change more slowly than people sometimes imagine, particularly when they are bound closely to the country they describe and to the songlines and the stories that hold them in place. The words for the parts of the country, the words for the seasons, the words for the plants and animals and stones would have been in many cases the same words then as now, or very nearly so. The person who placed the slab and the person who looks at it today could, in some sense, share a vocabulary across 1,000 years. This is a remarkable thing to think about. In most parts of the world, a language 1,000 years old looks very different from the language spoken today. Old English from 1,000 years ago is barely recognizable to a modern English speaker without training. The Norman conquest and many other shifts changed it enormously. By contrast, the languages of Northern Australia have, in many cases, held their ground with extraordinary tenacity. The grammars have evolved, of course. The vocabularies have absorbed new words for new things. But the underlying structure and the deep set of words that name the country have endured. So when the chamber is spoken about today in the language of its people, it is being spoken about in something very close to the same language that was used to speak about it when it was first sealed. The continuity is not just of memory, but of speech. The country is named, the chamber is referenced, the stories are told, all in words that have been carried more or less intact across 40 generations. That too is a kind of monument, not a stone monument, not a built monument. A monument of language, of voice, of breath. A monument that is renewed every time a person of the country speaks a word that their grandparents and great-grandparents and earlier ancestors spoke. The chamber lives in that monument. It lives in the words for it. It lives in the language that every day somewhere in the country is still being spoken. 38, the smell of the country. There is a particular smell to Northern Australia. It is hard to describe to anyone who has not been there. It is partly the smell of paper bark, which is sweet and slightly resinous, especially when the leaves are slightly damp. It is partly the smell of eucalyptus, which is sharper and more pungent, and which fills the air on warm afternoons. It is partly the smell of dry red earth, which has a warm dusty quality, slightly metallic, slightly mineral. It is partly the smell of the small native grasses that cover the open country, which becomes especially noticeable in the days just before and just after a fire. And it is partly other smells, harder to name. The smell of certain wildflowers that bloom briefly at particular times, the smell of the ironwood trees, the smell of the small spinifex bushes that cover so much of the dry country with their tough, wiry leaves and their resinous undersides, the smell of bushfire smoke from a distant slow burn, the smell of rain on hot stone, the smell of the ocean faintly when the wind blows in from the right direction. All of these smells have been present in the country around the chamber for the entire 1,000 years it has been sealed. The mix has shifted slightly from season to season, from year to year, from century to century, but the general character has been consistent. The country has smelled like itself, and the chamber, in its sealed darkness, has presumably been entirely cut off from all of these smells, since its air has not been refreshed since the sealing. This is a strange thought when you sit with it. The country outside, full of these many smells, vibrant and changing and alive. The chamber inside, with its own 1,000-year-old air, with whatever smell that air carries, sealed and unchanging. The two worlds are separated by only a slab of stone and a thin line of cement, but they might as well be on different planets. The smell of the country has not crossed the threshold. Whatever smell is inside the chamber, if there is one, has not crossed out. If the chamber were ever opened, the first thing that anyone present would notice, before the eye could see anything in the gloom, would be the smell. The first 1,000-year-old breath of the chamber would meet the air of the country, would mix briefly with it, and then would dissipate. It would not last long, that smell. It would be there and then it would be gone, and it could never be exactly captured. The chamber would have lost something irretrievable in that moment, which is one more reason why the chamber for now remains sealed. There is no reason to spill the contents of 1,000-year-old breath into the air of an ordinary afternoon. The breath belongs in the chamber. The chamber belongs in the country, and the country goes on smelling like itself with all of its many smells, while the chamber inside holds whatever it holds. 39. Children growing up knowing about the chamber. Across the generations in the country where the chamber sits, there have always been children. Children playing, children learning, children running about, children sleeping in the shade of trees during the heat of the day. The chamber has been part of the world that these children have grown up in, not as a famous landmark, but as a quiet fact of the country. Children in traditional communities then and now have learned about the country in many ways. They have learned by walking it with their elders. They have learned by listening to stories told around fires in the evenings. They have learned by hearing songs sung at certain times in certain places. They have learned by observing what the adults do and by gradually being included in adult activities as they grew older. They have learned by asking questions and by being given the answers that were appropriate for their age and their role. A child growing up in this country 1,000 years ago or any time since would have come to know about the chamber as a normal part of the cultural landscape they were inheriting. They would have known where it was in a general way. They would have known that it was sealed. They would have known that it was not to be approached without proper reason. They would have known the basic stories that explained its existence in the form that was appropriate for them to know. And as they grew older, if they had a particular role to grow into that involved deeper knowledge of the country, they might have come to know more in stages as it became proper for them to do so. Today, in the same country, children are still growing up with the same kind of knowledge. They go to school now, of course, and they learn many things that their ancestors did not learn. They use phones and computers and have friends in cities. They watch movies and follow sports and do many of the same things that children all over the world do. But many of them also still learn from their elders about the country. They go out on country with grandparents and parents and aunties and uncles. They hear stories, they learn songs, they come to know the chamber in whatever way is appropriate for them. The chamber then exists not just for those who placed it and those who currently maintain its keeping. It exists for the children too. It exists for the children who are coming up now and for the children who will come up after them. It is being handed on generation by generation with the patient, slow handover of all knowledge of the country. It is being kept alive by being known, by being respected, by being not opened, by all the small daily decisions that make up the long continuity of a tradition. In 1,000 years from now, perhaps, if the world holds together, the children growing up in this country will still know about the chamber. They will still walk past it in their proper ways. They will still respect it. They will still tell their own children about it in time. And the chamber and all of that will still be there, still sealed, still patient, still part of the family of the country. 40. The role of dreaming and stories. In the cultural traditions of Northern Australia, and indeed of much of the continent, there is something that English speakers have come to call the dreaming, or sometimes the dream time, or sometimes simply lore. The exact word in each language is different, and the concept does not translate neatly into a single English term. It refers broadly to a kind of foundational time in which the great ancestral beings shaped the country, established the relationships between people and land, and laid down the patterns that the world has followed ever since. The dreaming is not, as is sometimes mistakenly thought, a finished past. It is also a present. The events of the dreaming continue to be present in the country. The ancestral beings continue to inhabit the places where their stories happened. The patterns they laid down continue to govern how things work. To walk on country is to walk through dreaming, just as much as it is to walk through any particular afternoon. The two are not separate. Our chamber is, in all likelihood, part of a dreaming story. The exact story is something that belongs to the people of the country, and I will not try to invent it or guess at it. But it is reasonable to say that the chamber has its place within the larger fabric of stories that explain the country, and that those stories are part of the reason the chamber was made, and part of the reason it has been kept closed, and part of the meaning that the chamber carries for the people who know it. The stories of the dreaming are not stories in the sense of fiction. They are not made up. They are not invented for entertainment. They are accounts of how the world is and how it came to be the way it is and how people fit into it. They are taken with full seriousness by the people who tell them. They are foundational. They are, in many ways, what holds the whole culture together. A society without its dreaming would not be the same society. A country without its stories would not be the same country. The chamber, by being part of one or more dreaming stories, is held in place by something stronger than any physical material. It is held in place by meaning. The stone and the cement keep the chamber sealed physically. The stories keep it sealed culturally. Both kinds of sealing are necessary. Both kinds have held for 1,000 years with no sign of giving way. When we sit tonight with the idea of the chamber, we are sitting with one small node in this vast web of meaning. We are not seeing the whole web. We are not, as outsiders, entitled to see the whole web, but we can know that the web is there, that it is alive, that it is being maintained, and that the chamber is part of it. That is enough. The rest is for those whose web it is. 41. The craftsmanship of the country. The people of Northern Australia, both 1,000 years ago and today, have always been makers. They have made stone tools of extraordinary precision and effectiveness. They have made wooden tools and weapons. They have made shelters of various kinds suited to the climate and the season. They have made bags and nets and baskets from twisted plant fiber. They have made paint and ochre and pigments. They have made decorated objects of many kinds. They have made musical instruments, including the famous didgeridoo of certain northern peoples. They have made watercraft in places where watercraft were useful. They have made, in short, everything they needed to live well in their country. The craftsmanship involved in all of this is often underappreciated by outsiders. Stone tools, for example, can look simple to a casual eye, but to make a good one requires years of practice. The maker must understand the rock they are working with, must read its grain, must strike it in just the right way, at just the right angle to get the flake they want. A poorly made stone tool will not work well, and may even hurt the user. A well-made one will perform its job for a very long time. The makers of stone tools in this country knew in their hands what they were doing. The objects that may be inside our chamber, then, are likely to be objects of high craftsmanship. They would not have been thrown together. They would have been made by people who knew their materials, who took the time to do the work properly, who passed their skills on to the next generation. Whatever is inside the chamber, in other words, was probably very well made. It was probably the work of skilled hands. It was probably designed to last. This adds another layer to the chamber's quiet quality. It is not just that the chamber itself was made carefully, it is that whatever is inside the chamber was, in all likelihood, also made carefully. The entire thing from the outside in is the product of a culture that took its craftsmanship seriously. The chamber is a kind of nested gift of careful making, with each layer of careful making protecting the next. And the makers, of course, are long gone. They lived their lives and did their work and went on. Their hands are not here to make anything new, but the things they made remain. The chamber remains. The contents, whatever they are, remain. The craftsmanship endures, even as the craftspeople themselves have passed into the long sleep of the country's deep history. 42. The morning bird song, century after century. Every morning in the country where the chamber sits, the birds begin to call. It is one of the most reliable and most beautiful sounds in Northern Australia, and it has been happening every dawn for 1,000 years and longer, regardless of whether anyone has been there to hear it. In the first soft greyness before the sun comes up, the kookaburras start. Their laughing call is one of the iconic sounds of the Australian bush, although in the very far north there are other species of kingfisher that call differently. The first kookaburra calls, and then another, somewhere in another tree, and then a chorus builds up across the country. The sound is loud and unmistakable. It has woken every camper and every traveller and every resident of the bush for as long as people and kookaburras have shared the country. After the kookaburras, the other birds join in, honey-eaters of various kinds with their bright voices, lorikeets and rosellas and other parrots with their sharp cries, Magpies in some parts of the country, with their warbling song that may be one of the most beautiful sounds any bird makes anywhere. Smaller songbirds with their sweet calls, pigeons cooing softly, currawongs calling from high in the trees. The whole country wakes up at once in a cascade of sound, and then the sun comes up. The light changes from grey to gold. The birds quieten down a little, although they keep calling at intervals all morning. The country begins its day, the animals start moving, the lizards come out to bask, the people, where there are people, start their morning activities. The chamber, all the while, has been there. The slab has not moved. The cement has not changed. The contents inside have not noticed the dawn at all. The chamber experiences no morning. It has no dawn. It has only its own continuous unbroken night, exactly the same at every hour of every day. This is one of the deepest contrasts in the whole story of the chamber. The country outside, with its dawns and its bird song and its bright Australian mornings, is full of movement and change and light. The chamber inside, with its sealed permanent darkness, is the opposite. The two exist within a few centimeters of each other, separated by the slab. The slab is the boundary between two completely different kinds of time: the country's time, which is full of mornings; the chamber's time, which has no morning. And tomorrow morning, again, the kookaburras will start, and the dawn will come, and the country will wake up, and the chamber will not, and neither thing is better or worse than the other. They are simply the two kinds of things that exist together in this corner of the world, side by side, for 1,000 years now, and for 1,000 years yet to come, perhaps, and longer. 43. The small comforts of not knowing. There is a particular pleasure sometimes in not knowing. It is a pleasure that the modern world does not often celebrate, because the modern world tends to value knowing above almost everything else. Knowing is power. Knowing is progress. Knowing is success. Not knowing is, in the standard modern view, mostly a problem to be solved. But there is a different way to think about it. Not knowing can be a kind of rest for the mind. Not knowing can be a kind of openness, a kind of space where the imagination is free to move. Not knowing can be a kind of humility, a recognition that the world is larger than any one mind can hold. Not knowing can be, in its quiet way, a kind of pleasure. The chamber gives us this pleasure. We do not know what is inside. We do not know exactly when it was sealed. We do not know exactly who sealed it, or what songs they sang as they did so, or what they were thinking, or what they ate for dinner that evening when the work was finished. We do not know what color the slab was when it was first put in place, before 1,000 years of weathering took the color away. We do not know what the country sounded like in those particular weeks. We do not know what the wet season was like that year, or whether the build-up was long or short, or whether the build-down brought any unusual weather. There is a great deal we do not know, and for the most part, we are not going to find out. The chamber will not be opened. The people who know more than we do are not going to tell us the rest. The deep details of the story will remain as they should, with the country and its people, and we, on the outside, will sit with what we have, which is to say a general sketch, a rough shape, an outline of a thing that we know exists but that we cannot fill in fully. This is, in its way, restful. Most of the things we do find out in our daily lives are in some sense disappointing. We hear about a place and then we visit it, and it is smaller than we thought, or louder than we thought, or less special than we thought. We read about a person and then we meet them, and they turn out to be just a person like any other. We are told about a discovery, and then we look at the details, and the details are less exciting than the headlines made them sound. So much of finding out is a kind of small letting down, a reduction of an imagined thing into an actual thing, with the magic somewhere getting lost in the process. The chamber will not let us down. The chamber will remain always slightly larger than what we know. The chamber will keep always its private space, its inner stillness, its undisclosed contents. The chamber will be always the thing that has not yet been opened. Whatever your imagination wants to put into the chamber is willing to hold, because no one can come along and prove your imagination wrong. The chamber is a kind of permission for the imagination, given to us by the long patience of its keepers. This is a gift in a small, quiet way. It is the gift of a not knowing that is permanent. The chamber is one of the very few things in modern life about which we can be confident that the mystery will not be solved by a press conference next week, or by a research paper next year, or by a documentary the year after. The mystery will persist. The mystery will simply continue to be a mystery, with no resolution in sight, perhaps no resolution ever. And in that, the chamber offers us a small respite from the constant pressure to know everything. It says gently that there are things in the world that we do not have to know. There are things that are not for us. There are things that can be left to the people whose business it is to leave them alone. And the world is not diminished by our not knowing. The world is, perhaps, made a little richer by it. So tonight, as you settle into whatever rest the night will bring you, let the chamber be one of the things you do not have to know. Let it sit there in your imagination, just out of reach. Let it be vague and mysterious and beautiful in its vagueness. Let it stay sealed. You do not need to open it. No one does. It is fine as it is. 44. The end of a long evening. The night has grown late. The story has wound its long, slow way, and we are coming gently to its close. There is no big finish to give you. There is no surprise revelation. The chamber, at the end of our evening together, is exactly where it was at the beginning, sealed, patient, undisturbed, in country with its people, doing what it has always done, which is to say, almost nothing. Maybe by now you are already asleep. If you are, then thank you for letting me keep you company on the way there. The country we have been speaking of is a good country to fall asleep in the imagination, if not in person. Its stillness is comforting, its patience is restful. Its sense of deep time can ease the smaller, more anxious times of our own days. If you are still awake here at the end, then perhaps the story has worked differently for you. Perhaps it has given you something to think about. Perhaps you will lie in bed for a few more minutes, going over the slab in your mind, picturing the cement at its edges, imagining the dark stillness behind it. That is fine too. There is no wrong way to spend time with a story like this. Either way, the chamber will be there in the morning. The chamber will be there when you wake up and when you go about your day and when the next evening comes around. The chamber will be there next week. The chamber will be there next month. The chamber will be there next year and next decade and next century, as far ahead as you can think. That is the gift that the chamber gives you, the gift of knowing that some things last, the gift of knowing that some things are taken care of by the right people, in the right places, with the right patience for the right amount of time. The gift of knowing that the world, despite all of its noise and rush, still contains small places of perfect quiet, and that one of those places is in the north of Australia, in country whose name I have not given you, beneath a slab of stone that has not moved in 1,000 years. Sleep well if you're sleeping. Listen well if you are listening. And if you're awake, know that the country is well, and the people of the country are well, and the chamber is well. Everything that needs to be where it needs to be is exactly where it needs to be. And it has been so for 1,000 years. And may it be so for 1,000 more, and for as many more thousands as the world allows. Think, just for a quiet moment longer, about how lucky we are to share the world with something like this. A small sealed room of stone far away in the north, looked after by people who know what they are doing, holding whatever it holds, not bothering anyone, not asking anything of anyone, simply being itself across the long, slow centuries. It is a strange and lovely thing to know that the chamber exists. It is a strange and lovely thing to know that we have been able to think about it together in this quiet way over the course of one long evening. And it is a strange and lovely thing to know that when we close our eyes tonight, the chamber will still be there in the morning, exactly as it has been, untouched by any of our thinking, indifferent to any of our words, perfectly content to keep its long, deep silence in the country where it belongs. 45. A quiet thought to end on. Before we say goodnight, here is one more small thought to take with you into the dark. We live in a world full of urgent things. The news is full of urgent things. The internet is full of urgent things. Our daily lives are full of urgent things. There is always something to do, something to read, something to respond to, something to keep up with. The urgency is sometimes real, but it is often manufactured, and either way, it can be exhausting. The chamber is not urgent. The chamber has not been urgent for 1,000 years. The chamber has been the opposite of urgent. The chamber has been the most patient thing in its part of the world. The slab has leaned, the cement has held, the contents have rested, and none of it has needed anyone's urgent attention, ever. There is something restorative about contemplating something so unhurried. Something that, by its very nature, does not call us to respond, to act, to fix, to verify, to share, to comment, to participate. The chamber asks nothing of us. The chamber does not need our likes, or our retweets, or our outrage, or our enthusiasm. The chamber needs nothing, and in that, perhaps, the chamber gives us permission to need nothing too, just for a moment. Just for the length of one long evening, just for the time it takes to fall asleep. The chamber gives us permission to put down all the urgent things, and to rest and to be patient, and to let the deep, slow time of the country wash over our minds, the way the wet seasons wash over the stone year after year after year. So put down whatever you are carrying, set it aside for now. Tomorrow, if it needs to be picked up again, it will still be there to pick up. Right now, in this moment, you can let it rest. You can rest, the chamber is resting, the country is resting, the whole vast old continent is resting in its slow, patient way. And you can rest too. Good night, my friend, wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, whoever you are. Good night. If this kind of long, quiet story is something you would like more of, the channel will be here. Subscribe and turn on notifications, and the next slow journey will find you when it is ready. Leave a comment if you're able, and tell me where you were when you listened. It is always good to hear. And if you know someone who could use a story like this one, please share it with them. The country is patient enough to be heard by anyone who needs it. The chamber will not mind. It has been waiting 1,000 years already, and it will wait with infinite patience for the next person to come and sit with it in their imagination, in the quiet of their own evening, far away. Sleep well, rest well, the country is here, the chamber is here. And so for tonight, are you? Good night.